What's going on, everyone? My name is Brendan Turner. This is the Better Life Digital Summit series. So every month we're coming to you with a digital summit, bringing in experts who are figuring out how to get cash flow in this crazy market. It's tough. I'm going to admit it. It's tough right now to find ways to make money in real estate the normal route, the traditional route. They're just buying a single family house, hoping it makes enough rent. It doesn't work at 6, 7, 8% interest. And so what are we doing instead? We're going to talk to a few people today about that. So hello, everybody. Hey, let me know in the chat area real quick where you're at in the world. Let me know where you're at. And then we'll bring in our first guest speaker here in just a minute. But I just would love to know. We got Jesse in Northeast Ohio. What's up? Ashley in Denver. Carlos in Austin. We got Matt Buck in Maui. I'm actually in Idaho right now. I'm in Coeur d'Alene. Megan in Seattle, what's up? Brian in Kirkland. Danielle in Vermont, hello. Dina in Minneapolis, what's up all? Michael Rocket Blackstone. Dude, that's like the coolest name ever. Michael Rocket Blackstone. That's legit. In Charlotte, North Carolina. Got Zach down in Boise. What's up, Zach? Patrick in Portland. Colin in California. I don't even know how you say that. Millbrae, is that how you say that? Rob in Milwaukee. Clayton in Plano, Texas. Hello, everybody. I have been having a good time here in Idaho on a little trip with the family. We're actually headed to Dallas for the Limitless conference. Anybody going to Limitless next week? That'll be fun. That's Ken McElroy and Tall Yarber's conference that happens every year. This one's in Dallas at wherever the hotel is, big one down there. Whatever. Anyway, could be a good time there. And then I'm headed to Disney World with the kids and wife, so that'll be fun. So that said, it is time, I think, to get this thing kicked off and going. We got a special guest today. First up today, I'm going to bring on John Bianchi. John, welcome.
Thanks. Oh, how you doing?
Good, man. Good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
I appreciate you having me.
Let me see. Do you guys hear John? Okay, let me know if you hear him. And do I see? I don't see you, John. Do you have a camera? If not, I don't know. You don't need one, but
no, I definitely have a camera. It's telling me that the host has stopped it. So,
well, that's
put you on the spot, you know. But
okay, hold on.
Yeah. No worries. Take your time. It's nice to meet you, by the way.
Yeah, you too, man.
Yeah, appreciate you having me here.
Yeah, this will be fun. Let's see more. I'm gonna make allowed to record. I don't know, Matt Buck. Any ideas? I mean, I can make you a co-host. That's probably the fastest way to do this.
Yeah, I won't touch any other settings, so I don't screw everything up.
I trust you.
I appreciate it.
There we go.
How you doing? There we go. Now you can see me.
Good. Hey, by the way, today, as we're talking, or if I'm talking later, my internet is like from like 1985 here or something. And so it's going really crappy today. So if you guys lose me or something like that, just, I don't know, carry on without me, but it's the Starlink. So we'll see.
I'm now a host, so I'll just keep it going.
Right. You just take it over, man. It's your show.
No problem at all. I got this.
All right. Well, kind of the format today, I'd like to we typically do on these cash flow summits is I'll let you kind of take the mic for a while. If you got a presentation, you got to talk on what you do, how you do it. We'll do some Q&A. And we'll probably go for, I don't know, give it 45 minutes, give or take. And then we'll take a quick 1-minute break. So people have to run to the restroom, and then we'll come back with our second guest speaker of the day. So with that said, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you once again for having me here. And I'm going to give my full little intro so that everybody gets to know who I am. And then from there, what we're going to do is kind of jump into the presentation. So I just like to build my resume so that everyone understands who I am. My name is John Bianchi. If you were to find me online, I go by the Airbnb data guy. And the reason being is because I'm absolutely obsessed with Airbnb data. I have no idea why, but for whatever reason, it resonates with me really, really well. And I've just been able to understand it well, and it seems like I can understand it a little bit better than most people, and so I want to make sure that I can then teach people how I understand it so that nobody buys an unprofitable property ever again. And that's what I've been trying to do for the past like 3-4 years now. And my resume is that I have actually helped find over 180 properties in the past 2.5 years, and every single last one of those properties is cash flow positive. So I have a business called STR Search. It had a contract with this one company called TechVestor, and TechVestor actually is the largest short-term rental investment fund in America, and I acted as their head of data for that last 2.5 years. I still am their head of data. I just now work with absolutely everybody. And so It has been my mission to ensure that nobody buys an unprofitable property. I've got 6 free Airbnb data courses. I have one course that's 40 hours long that teaches people every single last thing that they need to know, because I just really want to make sure that people stop buying bad properties. And so since this is the cash flow summit, I, feel pretty good about being able to teach you guys how to find cash flowing short-term rentals, because there's quite literally nobody else out there that has done it more than me in the past 2.5 years. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it. I am going to share my entire process from a very high level. And the entire process I'm going to walk you through, you can find on my website for free and go through it. This is the 40-hour long course process that I'm going to be teaching you today. Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to hop into it and we're going to go into the details. So let's get going. The goal here is to get it right from the start. Okay. The way I always explain this is that you can buy any property and make it pretty, but not every property is going to cash flow. And so you really want to make sure that the property that you get, before you start setting it up, before you start making it look pretty, it's actually it's in the right area. It's the right size. You got it for the right price and all these different little things. And that's really what we're going to get into here. Okay. Now, a few of these slides, I'm just going to kind of skip over because I've already talked about, who I am and what I've done. Proof of success there is, we have a 100% success rate. I haven't helped anyone buy a property that did not cash flow in the past 2.5 years or prior to that. And I'm accurate within 25%. So if I said the property is going to make 100,000, it actually ends up making about 125,000. So I'm on the conservative side, which is exactly where I like to be. Okay. And I also want to stress, because you guys are probably hearing data and you're thinking like, I don't understand data. I'm not a math person or whatever it is. And I just want to stress the fact that neither am I. I did not go to school to be a data scientist. I did not go to school to be an analyst. I barely even went to school. But I used this simple logic that I'm showing you right here, and it worked really well for me. Okay. And the logic is McDonald's spends millions of dollars to figure out what's the best corner to be on, and Burger King opens up across the street with the exact same product. And all we are trying to do is be the Burger King. We are not trying to be the first person out there, because I actually don't know how to do that data. I don't know how to do the data to figure out what corner to be on, but I can do the data. I know to do the data where if I see somebody succeeding, I know what they're doing to make it right. And I can just sort of replicate that, and it ends up working out really well. And so that's the logic that we're going to be using for this. And for anyone who doesn't know, there is a website called airdna.co, and it has every single last Airbnb's data across the entire world. You can get every single Airbnb that exists right now. You can figure out what their annual revenue is for about $300 a year, which is an unbelievable resource to be able to make this work. Imagine if you knew exactly how much every single subway made across the entire country. You could analyze every single last one of them and kind of figure out where's the best place to put another subway, right? And you would know exactly how much that subway is going to make, and you could run all your numbers, and it'd be super easy to go to an investor and be like, hey, this subway is going to very clearly make this amount of money. Let's go open this up. And they would give you the money and you go for it. And that's essentially what we're trying to accomplish here today. Okay. Now, the problem that I'm trying to solve is not just that people are buying unprofitable properties, but it's actually the process that they're going through. And the process that they're going through is people are studying properties, not markets. Okay. And so the story that I always like to explain here to give you a visual of how people are typically doing this, and maybe it's not a lot of the people here because you guys are, there's a lot of people that get into real estate just to do Airbnb, and they don't learn how the fundamentals of real estate actually work, and they make a lot of mistakes. And so in other words, they think to themselves like, hey, we're doing well. Let's get into this Airbnb thing. We can go buy a second property. We've saved enough money. And let's see what our lender will give us. And so they go to their lender, and their lender says, hey, we're going to give you, you're going to be able to buy a home up to $500,000. And it goes, great. Then, husband and wife say, where should we go buy a $500,000 home? And they go, well, we really like this vacation town and we've been going to it for years. Let's go buy a place there. And so then they go to the realtor that's in that town and they say, hey, what costs $500,000 here that we can buy? They'll show them a bunch of properties that they can actually purchase. And then eventually they ask the realtor, like, do you think that's going to be a good property? And they go, yeah, it's going to be a good property. And then they go and buy it. And that process in the Airbnb world happens so often, it's ridiculous. They just go and look at the properties that meet their criteria of like what they can afford, and then they just buy it thinking like, oh yeah, it should be good. But instead, what you should be doing is you should be studying the market inside and out and understanding every single last little aspect about that market and understanding what drives revenue within that market. Where should you be within that market? What should you absolutely not buy? What is the limit that you can actually purchase in that market, and everything else in between? Okay. And so I want everyone on this call, if you're going to get into Airbnbs, if you're going to buy your next Airbnb, study the market until you know it like the back of your hand, and then start looking for the properties that are going to meet the most ideal criteria so that you're buying the best possible property within that market. All right. Now, I'm going to walk you through my 5 steps for getting it right from the start. And we're going to start off with the very first one, which is picking the right market. So obviously, if you're going to study a market, we want to make sure you're picking a good market in the first place. And a lot of people nowadays are operating Airbnbs remotely. And instead of just getting one where you're located, you're going to go and try and get one in the most optimal place. As an example, where I live, it's a vacation town. There's 2,000 people. I'm up in Canada. I'm on a small little beach town in Canada. And yes, Canada does have beach towns. And the homes here cost like $800,000, and they maybe make $30,000 to $40,000 a year in revenue as an Airbnb. And so then therefore they make absolutely no sense to purchase to turn them into an Airbnb. And then therefore I myself have to go then find another market. And so this is the process that I would walk you through if you're to be in that scenario. The objective here is to create a short list. Okay. There are quite literally hundreds, if not thousands of markets you could potentially go into. And what we want to do here is just narrow it down to somewhere between 3 and 5 markets that you can truly deep dive, because deep diving takes a ridiculous amount of time. If I were to deep dive all of Austin, which I've done multiple times, it takes me anywhere from 1 week to 2 weeks of full-time work to be able to find the most optimal thing to purchase within Austin so I can ensure that I'm not losing anyone's money, right? And so what we want to do here is just go through this 6-step process to eliminate all of the possible markets that you could go into until you're down to that 3 to 5. All right. The very first thing that I'm going to recommend is pick a market that you actually care about. I cannot stress this enough, because you're likely going to have to go to that property every once in a while. And I want you to actually care about it, because if you care about it, then you are going to put more care into it. Whereas if you don't want to go to that place, you never care about it, it's just going to get worse and worse. And eventually you're just going to sell it off because it's going to be a headache rather than like this nice thing that you get to go to every single year if you want to, right? And so if you like mountain markets, go to mountain markets. If you like beach markets, go to beach markets, and just leave it at that. Find all the ones that match up with your criteria. And that step alone will remove hundreds of potential markets that you could go into. The next one is going to be your budget, right? So naturally, if you can only buy a property up to 300,000, there's going to be a bunch of places that you can't go. And so then therefore, your budget will help narrow down the list of markets you could potentially go into. The third one is regulations. I strongly recommend that you only go into markets where they have favorable regulations in place and there is no talk of wanting to change it, because there's a bunch of markets out there that have no regulation in place. And I think those are extremely dangerous, because if they put regulation in place, you could be out of your business and out of your property very quickly. Then there's other places where they're extremely restricted, and obviously it'd be stupid to buy a property in one of those areas. But then there's kind of these like, places where they've put in regulation and they're like, hey, if you follow these rules, you're good to go. And it's like, okay, I'll follow your rules. Sounds good. That works. However, there's other places that say that. And then everyone in the town is like, no, I get that you made these rules, but we hate this and we want it out. And so you just want to try and get an understanding of how everyone within that town or that city is actually feeling about the Airbnb rules that are in place. That's a sort of additional step that you definitely want to take. So step 1, 2, and 3 there are very easily going to narrow down your list of potential markets that you could go into. And then you're going to have to start doing step 4 and step 5 together. These ones go hand in hand. Okay. And these ones, what you're doing is you're trying to be able to look into a market from a very, very high level. And so the idea here is you want the price to rent ratio of a potential property to be 20%. So you want the gross revenue to be 20% of the purchase price. And if you can find a property that meets that criteria, it's going to cash flow at an amount that you will be happy with. Okay. It doesn't have to be the 20% rule, but if it meets the 20% rule, you're going to be very happy. The lowest you can really go here is maybe like the 12 to 15% rule, but even, 15% personally is cutting it really, really close. And so when I'm and them going to look into a market that I have maybe added to my shortlist. And I'm like, hey, I'm curious about this market. What I'm going to start doing is looking at the properties that I can afford within the market. So let's say it's a $500,000 home or somewhere within that range, $500,000 or lower, right? I'm going to start looking at those properties and I'm going to get an idea of how much those types of properties can make on an annual basis, right? And again, $500,000 or lower, like somewhere within that range, because my max is 500,000. And so I go, okay, out of all these homes that kind of fall within this range, what do they do on Airbnb? And what do the best ones do? What do the lower ones do? And you can do that by going on to AirDNA, right? So this is the website that I was referring to earlier. And if you have a subscription here, you can type in a location. So I typed in Scottsdale, Arizona here, and then you can see there are 5,000 listings within this general area of Scottsdale. So just the downtown and then just this little area over here, right? And so what I would do is I would come in here and I would narrow down my search to try and narrow down the amount of data that I'm going to have to go through so I can be specifically looking at the most minimal amount of data possible, right? And I typically help people buy single family homes, and single family homes tend to be either 3 bedrooms or 5 bedrooms on average. And so what I'll do is I'll hyper focus in on the 4 bedrooms. So we're trying to get rid of as much data as possible. Make sure there's more than 2 bathrooms. We want to look at the entire places, not the private rooms or the shared rooms, which would be hostels. And we want to look specifically just at houses. And if I click apply, we go from 5,000 listings down to 936, which is good, but we want to lower it even more. And so then I'll go over to the performance tab here and I'll go to where it says days available and day and number of reviews. Now, in this step here, I'm going to have to explain to you the difference between good data and useless data. So some data within this platform is not useful and it's not accurate. And so you have to learn how to remove that data so that you're only looking at the stuff that is likely real, okay? And what is real data or good data? Good data is when this company here, AirDNA, has been recording the calendar of the listing for almost a full year. And so what you can see right here, it says days available. This is how long the AirDNA algorithm has been tracking this listing. And it's been tracking it for 252 days. And so we're almost at a full year with 252 days. We're only missing about 3 months. And to me, that's perfectly fine. So I'm happy if it's 250 days or more. However, if it were to be less, the prediction of how much that property is going to make on an annual basis tends to be a little wonky. And so I'm not a huge fan of it, right? As an example, if a property was only available for 30 days and it was showing 30 days here, that means it's going to try and predict what it's going to do over the next 11 months. And it just is, I'm not happy with the predictions. Okay. Let's put it that way. And I don't trust them and you shouldn't trust them either. This is a good site, but there is a lot of stuff you got to work through. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you want to make sure that you have a full-time host, and you do that by looking at the reviews of the listing. You want to make sure that there's a review every single month for the past 12 months. And if you can see that, then you know that you're most likely looking at good data. So as an example, if I were to open up this listing here and I go to the reviews, I could scroll through here and I can see how many reviews they've had over the past 12 months. And so I'd go through and I would check to make sure there's at least one every single month for the past 12 months. And if I saw that, I'm going to be very happy because I'll know that this is a host who is renting this place out full time, because that's what I'm going to do with my listing. And the data is a lot better when you have somebody doing that. Now, as an example with this listing right here, this listing has 0 reviews. So it doesn't even have a review yet, right? However, this company, AirDNA, is saying that the property is making $500,000 a year. That's not accurate. You don't make $500,000 a year and get 0 reviews. It's just not how it logically works. And so then therefore, anybody who has less than 20 reviews, I just ignore completely. And so if we go back to our metrics here, right, we go over to the performance tab and we go to where it says days available. This is how many days it's been tracked. I will remove everything except for the one that says 270 to 365, because it's almost been tracked for that full year, right? Then additionally, I'm going to remove the number of reviews so that there's at least 20 reviews for the past however long that listing's been up and running. And by doing that, I now went from 936 listings down to 253. This process right here really matters in large markets. If you want to be able to know if a really large market, which is where most people like to go, that's where the most listings are. It's one of the fastest way to go from over 5,000 listings down to 253. And now we're only looking at a handful of listings. Okay. Now I'm going to bring this back because I've been covering a lot here. But what I'm trying to explain to you guys is the 20% rule and being able to identify the 20% rule really quickly. Okay. And from a 10,000 foot view so that you can decide if you want to move forward with that market or not, because we're going to then have to deep dive it if we decide to add it to our potential markets to deep dive. Okay. And so now that we've narrowed down the data and we know we're working with good or potentially bad data, what you then want to do is you want to hop over to Zillow and you want to create a border. So I'm going to remove this border here and I'm going to add in a border that just goes around the area where we are looking on AirDNA, which is going to be the right downtown of Scottsdale, Arizona. And then I'm going to say, hey, let's say I have a $500,000 budget. Keep in mind, the first few steps that I mentioned is that your budget will determine which markets you can go into. And if I said I had a budget of 500,000, when I click that, there's only going to be a few that actually pop up, which you can see here. Now, mind you, if I were to increase this to 4 bedrooms, and if I were to say that they have to have a pool, which is going to be a must in this area, you can see that there's absolutely none left. If I bring that back down to 3 bedrooms, there's no 3 bedrooms with a pool for under $500,000 in Scottsdale. So this already would have been removed from my list if my budget was only 500,000. But hypothetically, if my budget was 700,000, now I have a whole bunch of additional properties that I can go to. Now, mind you, you don't have to spend the full 700. But what I'm trying to say here is we have a bunch of properties that fall within that range. And so what I would do is I would hyper focus on just the 4 bedrooms. So now I have even less data over here that I can take a look at. And I would take a look at these properties and I would try to understand exactly what they look like. So when I say what they look like, I'm talking about the frame of the property. So how big is the living room just visually, right? How big is the kitchen? What does it look like? How luxurious in it? And I'm going to do that for every single different area of this property, specifically the inside, but most importantly, the outside as well. How big is the outside? What can I put back there? How much room do we have to work with? Different things along those lines, right? Once I have an idea of the size of property that I can actually afford, because I can't afford $1 million property in this area, hypothetically, right? I would then go back over here and I would try to find the properties that seem to match up in size with the one that I just took a look at, right? And then from there, what I'm going to try and do is see, okay, let's say I'm randomly guessing here. Let's say that I were to choose this property right here. It's a 4 bedroom. It's got, it looks like a small backyard, which the property I was just looking at didn't have a very big backyard either. And let's hypothetically say that this property was fairly similar. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here. I just want to kind of demonstrate this. Now, this property is making $155,000 a year. And then this property over here is selling for $695,000. So if I pull up a spreadsheet and just do I think I could even just do, let's go 155, 123 divided by, what was that? 695, 123. We're going to get the percentage. And that works out to be the 22% rule, right? That's what we're trying to get at here. We're trying to see, do these properties meet the 20% rule? This one I just showed you met the 22% rule, hypothetically, right? I didn't go into every single last little detail, but let's play the game of hypothetical and decide that, hey, this maybe meets the 20% rule. If that were to be the case, I would then add this market to my short list of markets that I'm going to then deep dive. Okay. Because it's a market that I actually care about. If we go back to our list there, it's a market that I actually care about. It's within my budget. It has good regulations. And now all of a sudden it meets the 20% rule. Right. And so now I can add that market to my list of potential markets to go into. Right. The step 5 is integrated in there with step 4. Now, step 6 is the last final rule here is just checking to make sure that the market is not saturated. I'm really not going to spend any time here. I kind of want to remove this one because the saturation rule, the more I dive deeper into saturation, the more nuances there is to this. Essentially, really, what you just want to make sure is that the revenue and the supply is pacing at the same amount. So if the supply increases by 10%, you want the total revenue to increase by 10%. That means each individual listing roughly made the exact same amount of money, even though there's 10% more listings. If it's the opposite, where supply goes up by 10%, but revenue drops by 10%, that's a big deal. That means each individual listing is roughly making about 20% less. Now, there are a ton of nuances to that because there's a bunch of different subcategories, but that's the really high way of looking at it. Okay. Now, let's say you go through that process and you go through all the processes before, we can summarize this by saying that you found a place that you wanted to be within, that was within your budget, that had favorable regulations. It met the 20% rule with inventory on the market that you could actually purchase, and it was not oversaturated. You've now added that market to your list of markets that you're going to deep dive and really get into. Okay. So, with all that being said, and almost a half an hour gone by, we have completed step one. Step two, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on, but step 3, 4, and 5, I'm going to go through very, very quickly. So, don't think this is going to be about a 3-hour conversation here. Okay. So, the next step we're going to get into is building out a buy box. I think buy boxes are magic, honestly. Like I don't really know a better word for it. But they are this process that you can follow where if you study the market extremely well, you've now picked out this market, you know what there's some cash flow within this market. And so then what you're gonna do is you're gonna try and optimize and figure out what the revenue drivers are for that market and create a list of like I need X, Y, and Z within this market, within this location, under this purchase price. And if I can find all these things, then I'm going to have the best possible property that's going to cash flow extremely well. That's going to have a huge competitive edge over everybody else. And I want to give a idea of one of our real buy boxes that we have for one of our markets. So there's this one market that we're in, which is a 2-hour drive. Okay. So if you were to go from one end to the other, it's a whole 2-hour drive. It's a huge market, but there's one small specific area that's within an HOA within that area that we know is the best to be in. Right now in there, if we can find a 4-bedroom that is about $400,000 to $500,000 that has a lofted space. So it's got to have high ceilings and then a lofted space. And then we can convert that lofted space into a 5th bedroom. And then in the basement, it has a large enough living room to be able to fit a pool table and a couch and not just a pool table. It has to be large enough to fit both. And on the outside, it has a bit of a cabin feel to it. And on the back deck, it's got a big enough deck that you can actually fit some seating and barbecue and table, and there's a good enough space for hanging lights and everything. And then out the back, it's nice and flat, and you can add additional amenities back there as well. And if I can find a property that meets all of that requirement, then I will buy that all day without even thinking twice about it because I know it's the most optimal thing to purchase within this entire 2-hour drive. And those properties exist within that market, and there's a lot of them. And so every time they hit the market, we buy them, right? So that's the idea and the beauty of a buy box is because you can know exactly what to get. And then you can even optimize even better and further by like a bigger deck and adding better amenities and then adding more color. And I can go on and on and on. But that's the general gist of what we're trying to do by creating a buy box. That's why I think they're magic, right? So the 4-step process for building out a buy box is you first want to pinpoint the most profitable area. Then you want to clean and review the data. You want to determine which features are driving revenue, and you want to bring that all together into a summarized buy box. Now, when I say the most profitable area, I don't mean the area that has the highest revenue. Because if you're to be in this Scottsdale area, you can see this, Scottsdale, Phoenix, and there's right here, it says Paradise Valley. Paradise Valley is where the most revenue is being made out of this entire area. Paradise Valley has multi-million-dollar mansions. They're massive, they're beautiful, and they make hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they do not cash flow. And so then therefore they're not profitable, right? And so then instead what you want to do is you want to figure out where within this area is the best price to rent ratio, which is why I spent so much time explaining how to find the price to rent ratio. So when we were over on AirDNA, I was specifically looking at all the 4-bedrooms and I was trying to figure out how much these are making on average and how much those properties are selling for in that area. And what we kind of figured out in this hypothetical scenario is that they met the 22% rule. Well, what I would do here is I would then go and look into the 5-bedrooms and I'd look into the 3-bedrooms. And then I would look over in the northern part of Scottsdale and I would look over into Phoenix and I'd look over into Tempe and Mesa. I'd look all over the place and I would look at the 3-bedrooms, the 4-bedrooms, the 5-bedrooms, the 6-bedrooms in each one of these different areas. And I would try to figure out which combination had the best price to rent ratio, right? And once you do that over and over and over and over again, you will be able to understand where the best place is to be within this entire area. And this entire area, just so you guys understand, all the way around here, this whole massive space, there are over 35,000 listings, and there is only one specific area that is like less than a 5-minute drive around the entire thing. And there's only one specific type of property that I would recommend anyone to purchase. And not one property has become available within the past 2 months. So it's extremely rare, but there is profit to be made here. You just have to study it like crazy, right? And maybe Scottsdale isn't the market for everybody, but I'm just trying to give you the idea that you want to find the most profitable area. Okay. And you do that by repeating that process over and over again until you find the best price to rent ratio. So once you find the best price rent ratio, and let's say it's 4 bedrooms in the downtown area of Scottsdale, what you want to then do is you want to get all of that data and you want to make sure you're working with only the best data. And I already explained to you the difference between good and bad data, so I'm not going to go into too much detail there. But what I personally like to do is I like to pull all that data out and get it onto spreadsheets. As you can see here, I've got it all listed in a spreadsheet from who's making the most to who's making the least. And then from there, what I'll do is I'll start making notes on every single last thing that I see, because that's going to allow me to understand what the differences are between these top performers and the underperformers. And I want to kind of show you this image right here. This is the game that you are playing while you are trying to figure out what the revenue drivers are for the market. I want to try and make this as simple as possible. This is all you are doing. This is one of my favorite games when I was a kid. I used to love trying to spot the differences between these two images, right? And you can see like the tail's up here and the tail's down here. Right? It's kind of fun. Like you spotted the difference. The reason I'm saying this is because, as you can see in this example here, there's some properties that are doing 199 and 169 and 140, but there's other properties that are doing 118, 124, 125. But they're all the same size property in the exact same area. In this example, they're all, I don't know exactly what size bedrooms these are, but let's hypothetically say these are all 4 bedrooms in the downtown Scottsdale area. Why are some making, nearly 200,000 and some are making 120,000? To me, that is the most interesting thing. And sometimes it's luxury, but when it's not luxury, it is the coolest thing in the world when somebody can make $169,000 a year without a luxury property and somebody else is making $120,000 a year with the exact same type of property. They just did different things, right? And so what I do is I play the game of spot the difference, and I try to see what these top performers have that the underperformers do not have. And if you can spot the difference between those two, those are the revenue drivers. What these guys have that these guys do not have is what's allowing them to drive so much more revenue in comparison to them. And it is as simple as that. And if you can then spot all of those differences and make notes on everything that you're seeing, you can then take all that information and bring it together into a summarized sheet. In other words, you could say for the backyard, I absolutely need to have a hot tub, fire pit, pergola, and outdoor bar. And on the interior, I need to have X, Y, and Z. And if I have a 3 bedroom, I've got to hit these things. And if I have a 4 bedroom, I have to hit these things. And the location needs to be right around here. And I need to focus in on males. And then what you do is you take all these findings and you combine it all together into the listing that you get. And that's going to allow you to outperform everybody because you took the best parts of everybody's listings that was allowing them to make more money than the other people. And you brought it all together into one listing. And then it just becomes this super property, right? And so that's the process that you're going through. And the notes that I like to make, or the stuff that I like to make notes on, is the quality of the listing. Is it a luxury or an average listing? What's the pool style, the hot tub? How big is it? What's the square footage of the property? It usually doesn't give it away on Airbnb, but you can see how big of a dining room can they fit in the dining room? How big of a couch can they fit in the living room? How big is the game room? And you can go on and on and on, right? Then what about the rooftop patio? Do they have one? Do they have like views? What do they have, right? The interior design, did they give it one or did they not? What kind of demographic did they focus on? Where is it located? What's the quality of the kitchen and the bathroom? The game room, how did they put together the game room? The extra entertainment such as the cornhole or the mini pie, the quality of the furniture, how well done are the photos. I'll make notes on every single last one of these things because I'll then be able to spot the difference very, very quickly, right? And then I'll bring it all together based off the different, interior, exterior location. And then I'll take all of that information, all of that data, and I'll put it together into what I refer to as a buy box, right? And so up here in the top left corner, you can see I have my summarized notes of exactly what I need to drive revenue. I have photos of different examples of the best properties and the commonalities that you can see between them, the location of where all the best ones are, and then all of the data down below for me to be able to hop in and review every once in a while. And so if you follow these 4 steps, you'll be able to create a buy box and be able to find the most inefficient property within that market. So the cheapest possible property that can drive the most amount of revenue. And it's like a magic trick. Okay. And the bonus is talk to a local, talk to somebody who has local knowledge that understands, little things about the market that you're just not going to be able to see from the data. I can't stress that enough. So we have covered picking out the right market for you and building a buy box within that market. If you can do those 2 steps, you are so far ahead of everyone else. I'm going to rip through these last 3 and we're going to get to a Q&A. So hunting for a property, all I recommend here is now that you have a buy box, you can set filters on Zillow. You can save a search on Zillow. And so what I like to do is I like to go create a little border around where I want to be and where I don't want to be. So what you're looking at right now is the Fairbanks, Alaska map. And on the bottom right of Fairbanks, I wouldn't buy anything there. Along this highway, I wouldn't buy anything. And along this street that goes way back there, I wouldn't buy anything. But anything down in the middle, it can work, right? And it's got to be up. I can't spend more than $600,000, otherwise it's not going to work. It's got to be bigger than a 3-bedroom, and I have a couple of other requirements in there as well. And so I'll do that. And then what you can see is I now narrow down the properties that are closer to meeting my buy box. However, these properties range from $450,000 to $294,000. And so what I need to do there is then look into each one of these individual properties and figure out which one matches my criteria best, right? And then once I've done that, I've found the property that is like the most optimal property to meet my buy box criteria. I can then evaluate that property. And evaluating the property is really just predicting what the annual revenue is going to be. Okay. What do I think this is going to make over the next 12 months? Because once you have that number, you can actually underwrite the property. Can't underwrite the property without it. And so the way to do this, and I'm going to try and go through this quickly, is you find all of the properties that match up best to the property that you're considering to purchase that met your buy box criteria, what's in the specific area. You should already have all that data, right? But now what you want to do is you want to triple check this information. This is where I see the biggest mistake happen. People will build a buy box, then they go find a property and then they go and purchase it, but they don't triple check to make sure they didn't miss anything. Because sometimes you miss that the second living room was not big enough to fit a pool table and a game and a couch. And all of a sudden you have a game room that really can't compete with these other performers and you make $20,000 less. And I'm telling you, that's a real scenario. Okay. And so what you want to do is you want to grab all the listings that best match up and compare to your property and organize them from who's making the most to who's making the least. And what you can see here is you have some properties that are doing 140, 120, 100, right around 100,000. Then you have the ones doing around 80. And what you want to do is you want to go one by one and you want to determine, can the property that I'm considering to purchase beat that property or not? And it is that simple. Because let's say hypothetically this property that's making $140,000 a year. I review it and I realize that the property that I'm considering to purchase will not be able to beat that property whatsoever. Maybe that property had a majestic view and my property is not going to have a view. We may have the exact same sized home, but they have the view and therefore they're driving a ton more revenue out of that property. And I just have to suck it up and go, I'm not going to make 140. That's fine. Let's live in reality, right? And then you go to the next one, you go, these ones doing 120. You're like, I don't really think I'm going to beat those ones either. Then you get to these ones doing around 100,000. You think to yourself, like, maybe I can do as well as these ones, right? I'm feeling it. And then you get to these ones, and these ones are my absolute favorite because you got two properties right around 80,000. And what will happen is you'll find your base. You'll find properties where you look at them and you go, I'm going to beat these properties without a doubt. My place is bigger, better, more luxurious. I'm going to host better, take better photos, add more amenities. I'm going to dominate and crush these properties that are doing $80,000 a year. And I love that because that gives me all the confidence in the world to know if the property is going to make sense or not. And let's hypothetically say that that was the case. And I figured out that at a minimum, worst case scenario, I'm going to make 80,000. But then I also realized that, I'm probably not going to make 120, but it's like close to there, right? What I just did by following this process is I now have a range of how much this property is going to make. It's going to make somewhere between $80,000 and $120,000. I then have to figure out, how do I get it to make closer to $120,000 and avoid making that 80,000. And that's what's going to allow you to be able to figure out how much a property is likely going to make, which you can then use that number to actually underwrite the property. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about underwriting here because I'm not an underwriting expert by any means, but the strongest recommendation that I have is just to underwrite over and over and over and over and over again until you find a trend. And I didn't realize this at first, but I just started doing it. And then I found a trend and I was like, well, that's really interesting. So what I mean by that is I started underwriting a bunch of properties in this one area. And I realized that they're all roughly making about 10% on average. I was like, every property I looked at was, could make roughly around the same amount. It was costing around the same amount and they are all going to give a return of about 10%. But then what eventually happens is you find a property that maybe it just has like a backyard that's a lot bigger and the backyard doesn't cost a lot more to purchase, but it can drive a ridiculous amount of more revenue because of the pickleball court that you can put back there. And all of a sudden that property has the ability to drive far more revenue in comparison to the other ones. And now instead of being able to make 10%, you can actually make 20% out of that property. And when you see that, that's when pull the trigger, right? You did all of your homework. You know that that's a good market to be in. You know that you know exactly what to buy within that market. You've reviewed every single last property in that market. You've underwritten all of them, and you've done the revenue forecasting. And now you're looking at a property that is an outlier from the common pattern of what these properties tend to make within that area. And that's how you know when to pull the trigger. And so if you follow these 5 main steps, you will be able to get it right from the start, guys. That's my entire presentation. That's everything I wanted to go through. So appreciate you guys listening to this. I'm John Bianchi, the Airbnb data guy.
Dude, that was incredible, man. That was so good. I thought I knew quite a bit about Airbnbs, but I feel like 80% of what you just said I had never heard before or known. So now I'm like, man, I got to get some more Airbnbs. So thank you, man.
Give me
Really,
a
really
call.
appreciate it,
Give me a call, man. I'll help you out.
dude.
This is what I love to do more than anything.
Yeah, dude, I love it. I'm gonna do a little bit of Q&A. A few questions popped up in the question area, and I can read those. And if you guys have more questions, please just throw them into the chat area. First question here is, how do you know if a short-term rental market is saturated?
The supply outpaces the revenue. That's sort of like the easiest way to do it, right? So if there's, so I'm just going to share my screen, which I'm already doing. I'm going to hop over to here. So when you're on here, you can go to, when you're on AirDNA and you're within the specific market that you're looking into, you can go to the performance. And here you can actually look at how many listings have their, how many new listings show up every single month over the past 3 years, I believe they show, right? And so you can see how much the supply is increasing. It's a pretty straightforward formula. You can pull this all out and put it into a spreadsheet and it'll make it really easy to do, right? Then what you can do is you can scroll to the revenue area and you can also look at what the revenue has been over the past 3 years as well, right? Has it increased year over year? And you can export this one and easily upload it into a spreadsheet. And once again, do the formula, which is, if it made $100,000 last year and now this year it's doing $110,000, there's a 10% increase, right? And so it's just doing that formula for both supply and revenue. And if you can see that the supply and the revenue are going at the same pace, then it's not oversaturated, right? But if you can see that the supply is increasing way more than the revenue, then you know that it's saturated, right? So that's the one thing. And I know when I was explaining all this, I'm like, I don't want to go too deep into saturation and blah, 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 blah. But the reality is that there's a ton of different categories of types of properties that people are willing to purchase. So as an example, just going to, show this real quick because I love all these. These are all the TechVestor properties and the other properties that I've, worked on over the past however many years or 2-3 years it's been. And there are some properties that you can put together that give you such a competitive edge that you're not going to be in a saturated area, right? So this is one of my absolute favorite properties. I think it's so beautiful. It's so well done. And within this market, there's nothing else that even comes close. And we have a bunch of properties within this market, right? And nothing is coming close. And so then therefore, this property is always going to rent. And even when the downturn happens, it's going to be able to beat out the other properties. Maybe it doesn't rent for as much, but it's still going to get rented, right? The people that are complaining about the Airbnb bust are the homes that are not done well, right? And the ones that they cheaped out on a bunch of different things and maybe they don't know how to host and it's kind of crazy. But like, in Phoenix, there was the Super Bowl here. I think it was last year, it was here in Phoenix. And all the news lines and headlines and everything all over the place was Airbnb bust and people can't even get their home rented out during the Super Bowl. Meanwhile, we've got load in this area, right? Like we got a bunch of them. All of them were record-breaking numbers of what we were doing. And so there's a difference between these two. And that's what I'm trying to stress when it comes to saturation. It's hard to say for sure one way or the other. So yeah.
I love it. Here's a great question to Maya. How do you figure out what area to buy? This is a good general real estate question, not even just Airbnb, but when you're not familiar with an area, how do you know an area is a good area or not a great area?
Specifically for like how well it's going to cash flow on Airbnb, or are you talking about
More of like neighbor?
types?
I think they're getting to like neighborhood quality. How do you know it's a good neighborhood versus a bad neighborhood?
Gotta talk to the locals. You have to,
I agree.
right? It's like so realtor is gonna be an easy one. They're gonna give you the information. I'm always skeptical of realtors. And I'm sure there's a ton of realtors in here. And I don't mean to say anything bad about you guys, but what I always try to do is talk to somebody like a property management company that manages short-term rentals because they want your business. So I'll go to them and say like, hey, I'm considering to buy here. Could you tell me all the inside secrets? And they go, yeah. And they'll tell you all the secrets. Or there's people who are actually locals there that you can hire on an hourly basis to be like, hey, can you tell me your secrets? I'll pay you. And they'll tell you everything. Right. So, those are some of the easiest ways. The other way is just fly down there, right? Fly down there and take a tour or something. But yeah.
Yeah,
That's how I
I
do it.
agree 100%. Yeah, like if you were to ask me, like back when I lived in Western Washington, I lived in this little tiny area called Grace Harbor. If you're like, hey, where are the good neighborhoods and bad neighborhoods? I could be like, oh yeah, South Side is about this, West Side is like this, over on First Street it's this. Careful of that one neighborhood there. I could tell you everything because I knew the
Yep.
market and like I
Yep.
knew the nuances and the people that lived there and the people that walked by. You would
Yeah.
never get that looking at data.
Yeah,
It's just not.
so I no, you without a doubt don't. And I had a bunch of Airbnbs in Chicago before COVID, and before I even went there, I called up a friend who was a local there, and I said, "Hey, I'm gonna pull up a map. Tell me about Chicago."
Yeah.
And she just walked me through everything. She explained every single last little thing. I was like, that was beautiful, and she was 100% accurate with everything she said, and it helped a ton. So
Dude, that's such a
yeah,
great tip. That's something I'm going to take home with me is like that idea of like call if you're going to a new city, just call up somebody who's lived there for a long time and just have them walk you through each neighborhood. Like
yeah,
what a
it's easy.
valuable 30-minute call. Like
Right.
unreal.
And like, and you can, I mean, you can pay somebody $100, $200 and they'll tell you everything, right? Cause
Yeah.
they're happy to. So yeah, love that.
Very cool. All right. Ben asked, what would you do if there's not enough comparable data within a 5 to 10 mile radius? So it's more, maybe more rural or not a lot of Airbnbs there. How would you do something like that? Or would you avoid it?
So I become pretty useless when there's no data, right? If there's no data, there's no data, there's no data. What you're asking about is how does McDonald's figure out what corner to be on, right?
Yeah.
It's a far more complex way of analyzing data. There's a lot of factors that would determine the answer of that question. Okay, so um, there's no perfect answer, and honestly, I'm not really good at doing that just yet. I am learning right now. So right now, I'm trying to study Michigan. Michigan is a ridiculous market to try to understand because it's not city dependent. Yes, they have like these little beach towns and whatnot, but you can get an Airbnb anywhere in Michigan, and you can relate the data across the board anywhere there. And anyways, what I'm trying to say is that it's extremely difficult. If there's no data, there's no data, and there's really just not much you can do. You can't pull stuff out of nothing, right? But if there's very limited data, like you can sometimes pull some information out of that. You can get an idea of like, okay, well, how much is this one home doing? How much more do I think? And if I put another listing in here, how well it would do, right? But honestly, I'm not the best at answering that question, so
Yeah. That's all
apologize.
right, man. It's a good answer for you. Two more questions I got here. Let's see. How accurate do you find air DNA? Do you find that pretty accurate compared to like the properties you've done?
So it's a love-hate relationship. I am I've said some bad things about AirDNA every once in a while, and the head of AirDNA actually like called me up one time and gave me shit about it. And we just shot a podcast. We shot a podcast this week. We were joking back and forth about it. But there's good and there's bad, and that's why I spent a lot of time talking about it. And I'm not kidding you. Every single podcast that I've ever done, I talked about the difference between good and bad data because that's the quickest way for people to screw up and lose a ton of money. But when it comes to, how accurate it is, it's not perfect. And even when we narrow down to just the good data and we feel like it makes sense and all this different stuff, there's still a range of how accurate it actually is. It's never within a dollar amount, right? And so that's why when I was explaining, how do you figure out how much this property is going to make on an annual basis, you figure out a range. It's going to make between 80,000 and 120,000. Where do I think it's going to fall within that range? And am I okay if it hits 80,000? And if you are, then you're good to go, right? So, anyways, it's not perfect, but the more you can just look at that good data, the better it becomes, and the more you study the market, the better it becomes. So yeah,
I love it. Yeah, we do a thing. We do a thing at Open Door Capital in our commercial real estate business, but we call it like worst case, base case, best case, and we just have like those matrix that we do for every property. It's like what's worse, like not worst case like an asteroid strikes and we're all die, but like what's probably the worst situation that we're going to encounter here? It's 80 grand. Okay, what's the best case? 120, but like probably it's in 100. And if we have to make sure the deal works at the worst like the worst
yep.
case, and we're
This is
fine.
so I love that. I love that so much because you've been running a fund for years, and I've been working at a fund for years, right? And the difference that I've noticed between the way the fund looks at most things and the way that most people look at most things is that everyone's always wanting to shoot for the stars. They want the best case scenario. They're like, oh, I'm going to make it look so beautiful. It's going to make this much money. But if you can look at a property and be like, if the worst case is me breaking even, or even just making like $5,000 a year, can I live with that? And how certain am I that that's going to be an easy target to hit, and I can do everything in the world to outperform that? That's where it just becomes really, really. That's how you buy 120 to 80 properties with having 100% success rate because you're protecting that downside before you even buy the property in the first place. So yeah, love that one. That's how you do it.
Beautiful. If a place has reoccurring events like golf tournament, festivals, etc., how much do you consider a location based on that? Like, does that make you more or less wary of a place?
It's helpful. I mean, the idea is you always want a place to have demand, right? We're in the hospitality, we're in the travel industry, and so it's got to have demand. You got to have people traveling there, and they should be traveling for a reason. One thing that I don't like is when a place has a Ann Arbor is an example of a place I don't like because there are 8 football games a year, and so for 8 weekends you make a crazy amount of money, and the
Yep.
rest of the time you make nothing, right?
Yeah.
Or like next to nothing, and so it's just a place where I don't really care for. So if there are events, don't go to the place just because it has those events. Make sure there's other things outside the event that are still bringing people there so that there's demand throughout the year, right? You don't need 100% occupancy every single month. You just need to make sure over the entire 12 months you are cash flow positive.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I got a place. I'm in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho right now, and this is like in the summertime. It's unbelievable, beautiful. You know, Kardashians are here, and Justin Bieber's here, and everyone hangs out in the summer. It's gorgeous. And then like August, end of August hits, and the town's dead until the
Yeah.
following June when the triathlon comes to town, and all of a sudden, like you could get $1,000 a night for your house. And then it
Yeah.
drops. Yeah, super cyclical. And if you don't look
Yeah.
at that data, then you might think, oh, I get $1,000 a night every night for the whole year.
Which is another huge mistake people make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, last question for you, and we'll get you out of here. Amelia asked, in terms of like the 20% rule, I've been looking at short-term rentals that will still cash flow with long-term numbers, just in case the rules change. It's super conservative, I know, but what are your thoughts on that strategy?
Funny enough, there's actually the third time I've had this question asked to me this week. This
Oh,
week, and
funny.
like it is common, but not that common. So I only know one market where it will cash flow well as a short-term rental and you have the backup of the long-term rental, right? But the majority of places that are great short-term rentals have a lot of travel demand and the home values tend to be higher than the other places. And so then therefore, if you have to convert it back to an LTR, it's not really going to work out. The numbers are not going to pencil. You're not going to be happy about it, right? And so you're taking a level of risk by going into a short-term rental market, but like that's the game. That's what we're doing here. The one thing I want to stress, and this is what I do with every single last client that I have, is that I'm trying to recession proof the properties. And so that's essentially what this person is asking here. They're like, hey, if shit hits the fan, I can turn it into an LTR and I'm not going to lose my shirt, right?
Yep.
I fully agree with that. That makes a lot of sense. But it's really, really, really difficult to do. And so then instead, what you should maybe try to do is try to get a property that you can be the best in that market. Go to a market where you can be one of the best because when the recession does happen and the majority of people are not traveling, there are still going to be people traveling. And so if there were 1,000 people traveling before, now there's only 100 people traveling. Well, if you have one of the top 10 percentile homes within the market that you're in, people are going to book out your homes, not the other ones, because you're going to lower your prices to their prices and they're just going to take your homes, right? And that's how you recession proof a home. And every single property that we have found across all the markets, they're all in the top 10 percentile for their category. And so we're recession proofing by not skipping corners and having like a 50th percentile property that is going to lose its shirt during the bad times. And then you're going to be forced to sell a property. And that's the absolute worst thing you can do in real estate, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. A couple of quick points on that. A good example of that in Maui, when the COVID hit and they shut down all travel for a year to Maui. I didn't own any Airbnbs during that time. I own a couple now in Maui, but I bought them during COVID. But before that, I've got some good friends, Mike and Caroline Neubauer. They're great people. They're in the tribe, and they didn't lose, even though there was literally zero travel to Maui for a whole 12 months. They did not lose any money that year. Like I think they broke even on their Airbnbs. How? Because they had the best ones in the market. Like they had the nicest ones. So people absurdly still traveled. Like traveling nurses came into town. People from other islands had to come over. Some people got displaced for various reasons. And they were the best looking things, and they were militant about dropping prices to get their things rented. And it just shows like, yeah, when you have a great property, you can survive a storm like zero travel for a whole year.
That has been my theory for the past like 3 years, and we haven't hit the recession. And so it's my
Yeah.
theory, but we're eventually going to put it into practice. And hearing you say that just makes me like, I'm like, okay, maybe this is going to work, right?
Yeah.
Like this, it logically makes sense. I'm like, but
Yeah.
I'm really hoping it works out when we
Yeah,
get there.
Hawaii would be a good use case for that.
Yeah, that's
For
true.
sure. What
Yeah.
one more point on that I'll add is uh, a lot of people will look at a short-term rental and say, well, as a short-term rental, I can bring in 10K a month in cash, well, in revenue, but as a long-term, I'm only going to be in three. And let's say my mortgage is five, and you're like, well, I would be losing $2,000 a month as a long term. Maybe
Mhm.
instead of comparing short term as a backup plan, go traditional, consider rent by the room as a backup. Because now you can go, $900 a room and you got a 7-bedroom house, that might be an option. Do you agree?
That is an option. The other way to look at this too, and I've been thinking about this lately, is you really all you have to do is get through that time period, right? So
Yeah.
the other question then becomes, if that is the case and you're losing $2,000 a month, could you pay that $2,000 a month for the next year to a year and a half? Because after every single recession is the absolute best time ever. And so
Yeah.
then therefore you'd be, you make a bunch of money. So all you have to do is just make it through that time period,
Weather it.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, weather the storm. So
Weather storm. Which is
yeah.
why we have reserves. It's a good idea.
Exactly, which is why you have reserves, right? Or another job to help offset, and like maybe
Yep.
you're not eating as well for the next year, but you're not
Yep.
losing your shirt either, right? So something along those lines. But yeah, man,
All right,
this
man.
is
Well, hey, this has been phenomenal. Really, really awesome. So thank you for joining us today.
yes,
You're the
of
best.
course.
So
Thank
look
you. I
forward
appreciate
to,
you having me, man. This is
yeah, man.
great. All
I'll
right,
talk to you in the future.
I'll
Thank
see you
you.
guys later. Bye. I am the
All right,
host. Is
everybody.
that going to be okay?
Oh, yeah, I'm still
Make
host. So you
sure you
should be able to
reclaim.
exit out.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. I almost
you're
just hung
good.
up on everybody. All right. See you
Yeah,
guys.
yeah, bye. Thanks.